Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. I know I've been on like a week-long break, just relaxing because I needed to relax, but we're back. We're back on a roll with none other than Mr. Adrian Cox, an incredible artist. I would say visionary, really, which is with all the artists I work with, who kind of transform painting and creativity and like I guess 2D to 4D, like beyond 3D, which is always something super interesting and very musician-like, I would say. So, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here chatting with you.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to, make this happen. I think so. The way I probably found you and the
Mhm.
rest of the artists I've worked with, which is Chet and Mike Gamble, was
Yeah.
through Tool. And
Oh, cool. Cool.
it's really incredible, these amazing artists and visionaries and just random, from all walks of life
Mhm.
be brought together from this band. And so
Yeah. Yeah,
um,
absolutely.
I'm very grateful that you were on some posters, even though,
I mean, hey, I am too. I mean,
yeah.
that was a dream come true. And those guys are I mean, Adam and Danny specifically are big art collectors, and
Mm,
a lot of the people that they use for posters are artists that they just like or know or like that like show at galleries they like.
mhm,
And yeah, they've been hugely supportive of my career, even beyond the poster.
mhm.
I owe a lot to those guys. um so yeah, I mean, it's been a really cool thing being able to actually collaborate with them on something.
For sure. And it's been so cool to, see the journeys, and especially your art is super interesting, especially from, I guess, the watcher's point of view because of all the
Mhm.
lore. Like it's Dungeons and Dragons. It really is.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And so could you like describe a little bit? I know you've had countless videos describing it, which I've been binge watching because they're super interesting. But
Yeah, thank you. Yeah,
could you describe like a little bit of it for our viewers here who may not know the lore?
absolutely, absolutely. So um I'm primarily an oil painter. All of my paintings are connected by this mythology that I'm building. So nothing that I exhibit lies outside of this mythology. Um, Within this myth, I essentially have this wilderness world that I call the Borderlands. And in the Borderlands, the primary inhabitants, the creatures that live in this land that kind of fill this almost human role, the sentient beings in the land are the border creatures, who are the protagonists of my work. And the border creatures are kind of strange hybrid looking figures. They're often kind of a mix of jumbled up human anatomy with like blooming flowers and kind of like grotesque growths that are coming out of them. But essentially, the border creatures are this kind of envisioning of something that's not quite human, but more like something between human and landscape. So the way I think about it is they're kind of the landscape come to life to inhabit itself, to care for itself, to write poetry about itself, to make paintings about itself. So the border creatures are this kind of peaceful, symbiotic, category of being in this world. And within the lore, their antagonists, the villains of the story, are the blue specters, who are these glowing figures of bright blue light. And they kind of have this opposite relationship to the world they inhabit, to the border creatures. So where the border creatures are very connected to the world they live in, they're open to it. The way they inhabit it is they view the world as an extension of themselves and not just as a thing to be used. Whereas the specters, they see something and the immediate thought is how to make it an instrument of their will, like how to accomplish their goals using it. So, for instance, I have a series of paintings where the specters have, taken a knife and carved into the trunks of trees, and they're carving these like complicated like prophecies about, things they want to happen in the world, and these like symbols of their power. And essentially they're using the forest to try and like enact these rituals to bring about, a version of the world they want to see. um, and the third category of being in the world, in the middle of this fight essentially between this war between the border creatures and the specters are the spectral witnesses. And the spectral witnesses, for anyone that's seen my work and noticed these glowing rainbow figures, those are redeemed specters. So there's an event that happened that I painted in this 2018 show that I had at Corey Helford Gallery, where the border creatures were able to create an artifact that essentially redeemed some of the specters that took them and tore them out of the sort of track they were set on into a different mode of being. And when that happened, it's kind of this. I thought of this kind of spiritual trauma to the specters because that all they've known is this one way of being. So when they're jolted out of it, they become kind of lost within the setting. So all of the paintings of the witnesses up until recently have been them kind of wandering forlornly through these kind of lands, these like natural landscapes, looking at things, not sure how to interact with them, kind of distant from each other. And in recent years, they've kind of slowly been, I guess, learning how to be in the world again. So rejoining the world, finding, in one instance, finding a new body. One of the spectral witnesses, one of the rainbow witnesses, gets turned into a border creature at one point. So essentially within this lore, there's tons of events. I'm hitting the broad kind of strokes of this
Yeah,
world
yeah,
that I'm
yeah.
building, but every exhibition is kind of a mix of what I would describe as like setting paintings that are more about depicting the mood of the environment, like how the figures inhabit it. It's like not every single painting is a complicated story, but this is kind of the fabric that weaves them together. Now, I will say I don't expect everyone that looks at my paintings to know all of this or to follow the story. So they're painted in mind with this idea that people who see my work will kind of just notice similarities. They might notice recurring characters or be like, "Oh, I've seen that before," or "Oh, that symbol looks like it kind of relates to this other thing," and you kind of start to see that there's a connection. But I kind of I'm often, I don't hide the story that I'm building from people, but I often don't fill it in with like minute detail. I don't have like a book where it's all written down because I kind of like the idea that people having to piece this story together from these paintings because paintings aren't a comic book, paintings aren't a novel, paintings aren't a movie. When you see a painting, you don't get this whole complicated story. You might get a sense that there's a story, but you kind of have to bring something to the table, which I think is interesting. I'm interested in that. So that's my long rambling answer. I hope that kind of.
No, it was great. And the spectral witnesses are like
Mhm.
honestly my favorite thing. And it's
Thank you.
it's pretty relatable too, because I find myself hiking a lot and
Yeah.
you're just like, where the hell am I? Where did I go? Where it's like a beautiful disconnection from reality. And I
Yeah.
relate on another level to
Yeah.
those like rainbow dudes just like staring out into the wilderness. And they are my
Yeah.
favorite easily. But
Yeah, I get the hiking thing. Me too. I mean, I grew up in the South, like hiking in the Appalachian Mountains. So, like,
yeah,
yeah,
I'm down
I
here in
totally
Atlanta.
relate. Yeah. Outside of
Yeah.
Atlanta, I grew up in Conyers, Georgia, and went to University of Georgia for my undergrad.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So Lamar Dodd alumni, and then for grad school, I went to St. Louis to go to Washington University in St. Louis. Taught there for a bit, and then here I am now in Los Angeles, which is kind of where I've landed for the time being.
Yeah, and it's funny you brought UGA into it because I go there a lot during March for some reason because there's like
Yeah.
competitions and this and that,
Mhm.
and it's fun. I like the same thing. I find myself somehow in the midst of like incredible beauty with like there's
Yeah.
a stream you'll find in the
Yeah.
middle of like right next to the stadium actually. There's like a beautiful
Oh yeah.
stream, and you just walk in and you find it, and it really is incredible. But
Oh, I when I was in undergrad, I remember I was like one of those weird kids that would be like, it like after classes, like go down into the ravine where the stream is and just follow the stream until I couldn't anymore. So yeah, I mean, like, little kid stuff where you're like going and exploring the woods like that are
yeah,
just happen to be crammed between some buildings. Those like in between spaces can be so beautiful and fascinating.
honestly, and it
Yeah,
really
so I
is.
that's so funny. I know that exact stream you're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And but it's kind of like your art, right? Where
Mhm.
it's you'll find little similarities here, like with the snakes. You see the
Yeah.
snakes in some of your paintings, and you realize
Mhm.
it is all like a spider web, and
Yeah.
it's all connected, and it's crazy.
Thank
Um,
you.
and
I
I
mean,
also
it's yeah. Oh, sorry. I didn't
no
mean
no
to interrupt.
continue
Go ahead.
continue.
Yeah, I mean it's kind of just building this thing like I tell people I'm like building the ship while I'm sailing it. Like, people are like, "Oh, how's this all going to end?" I'm like, "I don't know. I don't know." I like that's the fun part of it is it doesn't end. Like you just keep like cobbling on things and like tacking them in place and the world gets more big, more lush, like the more you add to it. And all it takes is kind of this obsessive focus on like bringing the thing to life, bringing it to people and kind of like cultivating it like show after show after show. Like, because, with every show I do, I feel like this world gets bigger for me too, which, just increases my commitment to the work that I'm making, which is kind of the goal. Yeah.
Yeah, and then it's also brought in life in another way, and like I see people that almost embody the characters that you're creating, like at school or in daily life. Like
Mhm.
sometimes you'll see I'm not going to mention any names, but like I know a couple of kids who will get angry a lot and almost
Yeah.
seem to be like they are the antagonist in this world.
Yeah.
And like
Well,
you've
I
basically
do want to
done.
say, like, my thinking about, with how I have the categories
Mhm,
of characters in my world, like, I never want to make it feel like I'm pointing a finger and saying, like, this archetype, like the specter, like that
mhm,
exists in our world as like a person as a specter. It's more like those three things: the witnesses who are kind of searching for a path, the border creatures who have found a path, and the specters who are committed to this like kind of destructive path. Like, we all kind of inhabit all three of them. And there are moments when I'm generally like a pretty calm, nice person, but like, if I lose my temper sometimes, I like think about it and I'm like, yeah, we all have this like shadow side
it's
too.
like the
And
yin and yang.
yeah, exactly, exactly. So it's less about like pointing outwards, but yeah, I
Mhm.
mean, you see how human behavior manifests in the world and the effects it kind of ripples out, how everything's connected. And it's the work's very much about kind of being mindful of the kind of archetypes you allow yourself to inhabit to like bring into the world, with how you interact with people and with you know um, the world around you.
Mhm. So then how do we, I guess, open people's minds into the human interactions that are taking place? Like how do we like show them that this is really happening and taking place and you have to watch out because that's like from the music side, that's like the hardest thing. Like I've got a Swans album here and I think there's one friend of mine who I got to listen to it. Like only one because everyone else
Yeah.
is scared by like the album cover first of all, but then the music is also pretty terrifying. So how do we, I guess, just push it out there?
I think rather than force, I choose empathy. Always. That's kind of my goal is, I encounter people who are put off by my work too. Sometimes, particularly I think some of my earlier work was a little more aggressively grotesque, like a little grosser, a little more like, it's like they're just generally darker paintings. I was like figuring out how I wanted these things to look. And I think at that point I would have people who would just be absolutely turned off by what I was doing. But rather than being like, no, 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 you're wrong, it's more like you take it in, you kind of just open the door to allow people to change their minds themselves. Like, you can't force people to change their minds. You just kind of like bring what you can to the table with kindness and hope that people meet you in the middle. And if everyone does that, like, the world becomes a much more understanding place, because your one perspective, like your perspective, my perspective, the other person who hates my work, their perspective, like, no one person has like the picture that is right. You kind of have to understand that like plurality is just part of existence.
Yeah, it's like a big puzzle, and everyone's
Hmm.
got their little piece. That's what I find so interesting about life, like we connected over UGA, like how like it's crazy. And then my
Yeah.
friend over there will listen to the same music as me, and my friend plays violin. It was
Yeah.
also I play violin, and it's just so
Oh,
cool that
cool.
we all have these little connections again to the spider web. We're all
Yeah.
little connected. And in these times of adversity and of pain,
Mhm.
and it's 2024, so we're like, I guess, a little farther away from the pandemic, but it's
Yeah.
still very much looming in our presence.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's been really tough, I think, for a lot of people, like even people who've done okay. Like it's just I think the ground that we've stood on feels less stable now. And I think it is less stable and it's kind of frightening. And I think I think of my work as overwhelmingly positive. Like I
Yeah.
think my work is very optimistic. And I think in my personal life that optimism can be hard to maintain. So sometimes I like I like to let the work kind of have faith in the world for me, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
There's not a total disconnect between me and the work, but it's like I'll choose to make something that sees the world a certain way, so that I can perhaps like learn something from that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. It's like Mr. Chet Zar, who I had in an earlier episode. We talked about how like his art is very much more grotesque and like
Yeah,
scary.
yeah,
But if you put all your anger out on a drawing and all your thoughts out on a painting, then you're kind of relieved of that. And so it's the same, I guess it's the same with yours, right? Where even though you may not be the most joyous or happy in that one moment, if you put that out, it kind of rubs back off on you.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think it's so funny what you're saying because yeah, I mean, like why metalheads are like some of the nicest people you'll
Yeah,
ever meet.
yeah,
They
yeah.
listen to this like really intense music, like every metal show I go to, it's just full of people who are like super supportive and
Yeah.
nice and like, oh, excuse me, thank you, nice, yeah. Uh, and it's again, it's because like sometimes the catharsis is necessary, just kind of keeping a level head.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And so I guess that brings me to the next question, which is what I mean, I see the John Carpenter shirt. What kind of music are you generally listening to when you were creating your works of arts?
I mean, I am all over the place for genres. I mean, I like a lot of what I listen to is metal, but like definitely not exclusively because I love like everything from metal to bubblegum pop. Like I love like black metal. Recently I've been really digging this new album just dropped by this band. It's their debut album. I think they're out of New York. Their band's called Castle Rat. I've been digging their their album they just dropped like
Great
I think this
name.
week. Yeah, like so like a lot of doom metal, a lot of black
Hmm.
metal, but like pop like Kim Petras. I've been listening to Sir's new album Heavy a lot recently. Just kind of like all over the place. Synth, like obviously John Carpenter, like I try not to get too much into a rut. I like to just kind of go down rabbit holes of like building weird playlists and just finding kind of unexpected things. Um, so I mean, when I'm painting, it's like if I have a deadline and I feel like I'm screwed and I have to really really just pedal to the metal haul forward, it's going to be nothing but metal while I'm working. It's going to be loud, it's going to be fast, it's going to be heavy. But normally, I'm listening to podcasts or audiobooks or that kind of
Hmm.
thing, and trying to just kind of keep a steady pace because my work is very slow to make. So, trying to rush it can be a little bit exhausting. So sometimes listening to something like a podcast, we can kind of just like chill out and work is nice.
Oh yeah, I love I guess for me it's weird. It's like whenever I'm doing homework, I think I
Mhm.
usually work better just listening to some random people talk in the background because
Yeah,
it's like a coffee shop almost. It's cool.
yeah.
But yeah, I'm the sort of guy that I just have one super chaotic playlist with like 2,000 songs on it.
Oh wow,
But
yeah, yeah, yeah,
that's the way I like it because sometimes you'll like you'll have some. I like Mastodon a lot, which is
yeah, yeah. Right
Georgia's
on.
metal band. So you'll have like a
Hmm.
really heavy Mastodon song, and
Yeah,
then maybe we'll go into like the Beatles,
yeah,
or and
yeah,
then some bub like what's his name? Have you listened to 100 Gex?
yeah, yeah, yeah. They're
Yeah,
so
yeah.
wild. I mean, yeah, like that's the kind of like I don't know some of that pop music that like I definitely I listen to it. I'm like I feel my age. I'm like yeah, I'm mid 30s. Like this is definitely like more for younger people, but like it's cool and it's wild and I like kind of dig it. I don't like listen to that kind of stuff all the time, but it's like you just want to bring in like a lot of like eclectic variety just to kind of keep yourself on your toes like in kind of how you hear things.
Oh yeah, and it's really opened my mind too because I never thought of myself as a pop
Hmm.
enjoyer, but
Yeah,
then 100 Gex are kind of like this weird moral gray area where
yeah,
like it's like technically pop, but it's like a label. because they have so much experimental stuff and it's weird and it's disjointed.
I
So is
mean,
it
so
pop?
much of pop is like that though. Like I think once you get out of the like, Grammy winning level of
Huh.
like, the big names of pop
Mm,
into like more uh kind of people like just below the surface, or like people who are like really experimenting, you get like this kind of crazy eclectic mix of influences and sounds, and like people who are like, yeah, like, I don't know, thinking about like an artist like Poppy, who like used to
mhm.
just do like this very like hyperactive bubblegum pop, and then it's like, okay, fine, I'm gonna like bring in some metal sounds into this and like get real heavy. I don't know, there's a lot of wild experimentation happening. I think like, in recent history, music's just totally fragmented. Like, there's so many people self-producing music and releasing it that like, I think genres have just started to dissolve. And I think like for the best, I think music
Yeah,
has
yeah.
improved by it. Like, for example, I like black metal. A lot of the fans who like black metal are purists, and I can't stand that. I'm like, yeah, I mean, like, some straight black metal, like heavy stuff, like I really like, for instance, I've been listening recently to the band Black Braid,
Mhm.
who's this awesome indigenous black metal band, but like, their sound, they're just making straight like, black metal. Like it's not a genre blend, it's just black metal. But then there are other artists who are like, fine, I'm going to bring in like some synths and like going to layer that in. And like, okay, fine, we're going to do black metal, but here's a hip hop breakdown. And it's just completely bonkers. And sometimes it doesn't work at all, but I love the experimentation. I think it's great.
For sure. And I honestly kind of attribute that to the pandemic, right? Because ever since that, we've had, I guess, we've been more open-minded to like inter-country conflicts and
Hmm.
what's going on in other states.
Yeah.
And so that kind of makes the world a little bit darker, considering that
Yeah.
we now are much more aware and it's popular to be aware, which is a good thing. But then in
Yeah.
that same way, I guess like 2023 was an amazing year for music. And I see
Yeah.
that going into 2024, which like April 19th, we have a High on Fire album.
Hmm.
And then there's one more record that's coming out then. So there's like a bunch of like every other Friday, we have incredible
Yeah.
records coming out. I don't know,
Yeah.
it's so exciting. It's
Oh,
just
I know. I mean, I think that's one of the things of like living in an era where you're like, are we the last generations of humans? Like, like, is this how we kind of go out? And I think that's I mean, I think like my parents, not our parents, obviously different generations here, but like my parents, like being like boomers, probably would have said that like with all of the nuclear scare of mid 20th century, that like we've been through that, like, fear of annihilation before. But
mm,
I think people feel it more pressingly now than ever, because it's just layering different problems on top of each other. And crazy that in the middle of all of that chaos and all of that, like, looming kind of stress, artists are just doing their own thing like more furiously than they ever have. Like human beings are just like putting art out into the world, like it's just something that we naturally do as like part of how we exist as a species. And I think that's like kind of a beautiful thing.
for
It's
sure.
one of the redeeming qualities in the middle of something that can be quite hard to live through.
It makes the world a little bit better, each
Yeah.
art piece at a time. But then that brings it to like the bigger question that I'm sure a lot of people have had on their minds, which is like, if this is it, which is a
Hmm.
Strokes reference, but if it's over, if we're done,
Yeah.
then how do we maintain dignity as human beings and
Yeah.
have that respect for each other? While like I don't know, it's like with the 2020, right? We saw the looting and stuff,
Hmm. Yeah.
and I guess we kind of lost a little bit of that kindness that was already, dwindling because I don't know, but like we kind of lost a little bit of that. So how do we get that morale back up? Because if it's over, if tomorrow's the end and then
Yeah.
we're done for it, I don't know, how do you maintain positivity and
I mean,
kindness and your morals? That's like
my
a
answer is stay local in that. I mean, like it starts with your neighbor. It starts with like, who you see in your daily life, you know. Um, Again, like I keep saying empathy is kind of my response to a lot of this, but it's really about understanding what people are going through as best you can.
mm,
And my big kind of guiding like principle I try to move through the world with is just like move through the world as kindly as you can. Like it doesn't cost you anything to not cause harm, if you're able to, you know.
yeah.
And I think in terms of like big societal changes, like that's cyclical, you know. So, sometimes people are in the mood to fight, and sometimes they're not. And we're going through this period where um, it feels like things are fracturing and things are there's a lot of friction. And you know, I do genuinely think that that's part of a historical cycle that like we'll move out of
Mhm.
this. But like, you know, we also have the weapons to destroy ourselves at this point. So it's like, you know, you try
Yeah.
not to think too hard about that and be like, I'm gonna choose to be optimistic because the alternative is just not like you can't entertain that and like live with it, you know?
Yeah, especially because of how our brains work and everything, you know. If you think about it too hard, then it goes downhill.
Yeah.
So yeah, we'll move away from let's go to some more happy stuff, which
Yeah,
is
yeah, yeah,
like
sure. I didn't mean to get heavy with that,
no,
you
no,
know,
no.
just yeah.
I love heavy topics, like heavy music. I've been really into like sad music, even though I'm happy. This is the best. Like 2024 has been the best year of my life, but
Yeah.
I guess it's good to reflect on that. But do you have any new projects going on? Like I know you just did a
Yeah,
solo
so
exhibition, right?
yeah, so that solo exhibition actually opens I think the 27th. I
Oh,
think that's
sweet.
next weekend actually. So everything's in Melbourne now, everything's at the gallery. They're hanging the show. Preview's about to go out and show opens in a week. So yeah, I just finished a massive project. And I'm really proud of this show. Um, you know, this was one where whenever I show with Vayner Gallery, who's in Australia,
Mhm.
because I'm shipping all the way to Australia, because I do such large shows with my other representing gallery, for Halford Gallery, I usually choose to do something a little bit more contained. So this
Mhm.
show, like for instance, my last Corey Halford show was 25 new paintings, and a lot of them were large. Like you know, consistently there were a number of
Yeah.
like 4 foot paintings, 5 foot paintings, that kind of thing. Um, this show is a little bit more condensed. It's 10 paintings versus 25, 10 paintings, and you know the largest one is like 34 inches, so a little bit more contained. But I think it's one of the tighter shows I've ever made. Like there's only 10 pieces, but they all talk to each other. They're all part of this like unified concept, and they bounce off of each other, I think, in a very interesting way. So I'm very excited to share that with people. um you know, it's this kind, again, it's kind of a wild narrative that unfolds throughout the exhibition. But you know, all starts with this character, Maker, who's a sculptor,
Mhm.
getting one of the border creatures who gets shot through the hand with an arrow by a specter. And you know, there's this, it's kind of portrayed as this kind of mystical event. The painting that depicts it is called The Opening of the Cosmic Wound. And
Sick
then from
name.
there, like, yeah, the rest of the show is Maker figuring out how to live with this poisoned hand, this wound, this that won't heal. And you know, they try like filling it, healing it with their work, like doubling down on this like kind of alchemical process of bringing art into the world. That doesn't work. And what ends up happening is there's a ritual where this border creature falls asleep beneath this mandala uh, of a labyrinth. And as they dream, they're in a state of regeneration. So the idea is that they're dreaming themselves to a point of healing, which isn't reached during the show. Like it basically, the show is kind of an Empire Strikes Back situation where, you know, this character falls asleep, and then the remaining 6 paintings in the narrative are Maker's dreams as
Mhm.
they're sleeping beneath this mandala of what I've called the labyrinth of unknowing. And you know, so the rest of the painting is this kind of like this delving into this kind of dream world where I got to be a little bit more playful than I typically do with imagery, because I didn't even have to follow my own narrative rules, because you know this is, you know, I was limited, I guess, to the idea of like if a border creature is dreaming, they're not going to dream something that doesn't exist in their world in some capacity or doesn't resonate with their world. But
Yeah.
all the same, I got to be, I think, more playful and more surreal than I typically am, um, and with like how I think about the narrative, which was kind of fun and liberating. So yeah, I think people will be into this next show. I'm really excited to share it.
Sweet. I mean, there's no way I'm gonna be able to go to Melbourne but hopefully
Oh
some
yeah, it'll
pictures will
all be online.
circulate. Yeah, yeah.
It'll all be online. Every show I do is, the gallery puts it up online. I'm usually slow to update my website, but I eventually always put my work online. Um,
Sweet.
yeah.
And maybe, I know Tool's about to go on the European dates, so who
Oh
knows?
yeah.
Maybe we'll see Illumin into some of the posters. So
Yeah, we'll
then,
see. We'll see. That'd be cool.
are there
Yeah.
any other? I know you kind of make art for yourself and for your own enjoyment, but
Mhm.
are you ever up for like doing an album cover, or are there any like artists or collaborations, I guess, with
Uh, I think for the right projects,
mm,
I do it. I'm usually very careful about um because what I do is fairly specialized. Like I
mm,
my paintings take forever to make. Um, so I'm very careful about like how I choose to use the images because
mm,
it's not the same. I think like kind of filling an illustrator role can be a little bit more difficult if you're as slow as I am. So it's the kind of thing I'm really open to, but only for the right artist. So yeah, I mean, yeah, I do it, but I've had some musicians approach me and things haven't kind of worked out for album covers, but I've done album covers before.
yeah,
There's this absolutely phenomenal prog metal album by Wilderun that I did the album cover to. If you haven't listened to Wilderun, I highly
I'll write them
recommend it.
down.
It's Wilderun.
Sweet.
But yeah, I mean they're great guys, and they got signed like right after I did the album cover for this one, which was great for them and like really cool. So um, but yeah, I mean, it's like this big, like lush concept album, the kind of thing I'm like perfectly suited to illustrate. So yeah,
Awesome. Yeah, I'll definitely check that album out. I love, new artists and especially prog metal. I love prog metal because I
yeah,
hear I have a Genesis album somewhere there and I need to get some
nice.
more metal albums.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
No, we'll
Cool.
see. But here, so we're I think 7 minutes left. This is like a
Cool.
tradition now. Zoom, give me free unlimited Zoom because I'm not paying $7 or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Yo, no tango dinero. I don't have money.
Hmm.
But yeah, so I'm gonna do one last loaded question. You got it?
Yeah, yeah. Go for it.
Sweet. You got to give me three, I guess, categories or something that'll go into categories. So you can be like three artists, three uh, people you want to work with, three bands you like, or you could do one of each as long as it's three.
Yeah.
And the kicker is it's got to be to change someone's life, which can be for the better, it can be for the
Ooh.
worse. It just has to change someone's life. We're up
Okay.
on 6 minutes and 17 seconds. Your time
Okay.
starts now.
So three categories. It could be like artists, books, and bands.
Whatever you want.
Okay, and then just one of each of those.
Whatever you want, as long as it's
Okay,
three.
okay.
Three's the
I
magic
got you. I
number.
got you.
Yeah.
I got you. Um, all right.
And I'm gonna write this down by the way. So
All right. So I'm gonna throw out first book. And this one's just fresh off my mind because I finished it right as I was finishing my show. Piranesi by Susanna Clark. It's kind of a fantasy novel, um, but um, it's just it's not for everyone. But if you like surreal fantasy, you might enjoy it. And it's this incredibly poetic, lyrical kind of book about this guy who's trapped in this. He like inhabits this like world that's just this gigantic palace, basically, where the bottom floor is an ocean that's in the palace, the middle floor is kind of inhabited, and then the top floor is just clouds and sky inside the palace. And nothing like there's only one other person in this whole world, and there's nothing beyond the palace itself. Like you can look outside of the windows and like see the sky, and there are empty courtyards, but it's everything's inside this world, and it's filled with these marble statues. And it's this mystery of this guy who's like wandering this world and exploring it. And um, there, it just I'll move on pretty quickly, but here, like I guess what I'll say why I found it so impactful for me is I think there's something it says about both the purpose of art in the world and also the way that we can look at the world informed by that, where it gives meaningfulness to life. right? Like it's a very, I think, philosophically positive book. Um,
I'll
and
definitely
I
read it.
yeah, it's one of my favorite books I've read. Um, ooh, let's see, artists. You know what? I'm gonna just throw out William Blake. Everyone, I think I remember reading his poetry when I was in school. The poetry is always where you first encounter him, but to find out that he's this kind of, he's this English romantic artist who's a visionary in the sense of he's having literal visions, like he's seeing angels, like the sky is like seeing things, and also like creating this incredible art that's blending printmaking with illustration, with like writing his poetry, with calligraphy. And it's this kind of like total work of art where he's bringing a world into existence. And I think I really resonate with that personally because of how I work. But I think really his work is worth investing in. And let's see, last one. Let's say, oh man, you're really putting me on the spot here. Uh, Let me think here.
That's okay. You still got like 3 minutes. So
Okay, okay. Um, you know what? I'll go album.
ooh.
I think Illusory Walls by The World is a Beautiful Place and I am no longer afraid to die. Um,
Uh-oh,
yeah,
that's a
that's a mouthful.
I'm sure the title will be enough for Spotify.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah, The World is a Beautiful Place and I am no longer afraid to die is like one of the longest band names ever. But again, it's like very specific sounding, so not for everyone, but it poetically encapsulates a lot of, I think, what we've been talking about in terms of that anxiety about the chaotic nature of the world we live in right now. And it's this whole journey through a world in which like we're all getting strangled by this late stage capitalist kind of evil society we've built, and people are trying to like maintain hope. But it ends on this like kind of beautiful note of like hopefulness, and I think offers this very uplifting kind of like arc through the whole album. It's a long album, but highly recommend it.
I love long albums.
Yeah, of
Well, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for the recommendations. I'm definitely
course.
gonna be listening to that for the rest of my day. And if you're ever like in Atlanta or I guess Georgia again, like email me. We'll see if we can meet up or something. Because
Yeah, sure
again,
thing,
it's
man.
so cool that you're from UGS. I can't even wrap my head around that. I think it's the first time that's happened in like
It's a cool connection.
20
Finding out that
interviews.
we both know the same stream by the
Yeah.
stadium is just like, that's perfect synchronicity. So yeah,
Okay, well now Zoom is crying that I've less than a minute, so I don't want to get cut
uh,
off. But again, thank you so much for being here.
you bet.
Let's stay in touch, and I'll keep my eye out if you have any stuff in Atlanta. Okay?
Absolutely. All right. Thanks for the conversation and
Yeah.
take care.
Thank you. Have a good day.